Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Welcome back to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today we're speaking with Isaac Jeffries of Business for Development. We'll be chatting about why social enterprises need to be doing good, not just donating for good, and some solutions to key mistakes new organisations are making. Welcome to Sproutcast, Isaac.
Thanks, Julia.
Now, I like to start by asking guests about their background in the not-for-profit and social enterprise sectors, maybe to provide some context about where you've come from and I guess possibly the different perspectives that you bring to the work you do in the sector. So how did you first become involved and why is this where you work?
I first sort of heard about the concept of a social enterprise about 12 years ago. I was quite young. I was in my teenage years and I was involved in an impact investment deal. It sounds quite absurd, but a friend of mine was starting a social enterprise in Sri Lanka selling and building electric three-wheeled sort of like tuk-tuks. And the whole thing was a spectacular failure and it taught me a heck of a lot about it. But what I remember walking away from was a sense of, wow, you can do good and make money at the same time. So that was my introduction to social enterprise. From there, I started my own business when I was at high school. I then did a business degree at university. I went to work for ANZ in strategy. I didn't really enjoy that very much. I then moved to the not-for-profit world and worked in community housing. And I was there for about a year and a half. And then I met two people called Bessie Graham and Paul Steele. And I had coffee with them and they said, we're starting a social enterprise incubator. And what I saw was an amazing opportunity to kind of blend that commercial and not-for-profit thing to create something really, really amazing. And so that's where I spent the last 3 and a bit years is with the Difference Incubator.
Now, you have a couple of different roles now, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the work that you actually do with organisations.
So I work for Business for Development and my work is based on building inclusive businesses and social enterprises in Asia and in Africa. So I'm currently working on building a business in Papua New Guinea that is going to hopefully increase the incomes of some of the poorest people in the world by about tenfold. I've also spent the last 3 years at the Difference Incubator and I'm still there as an associate and as a consultant who comes in to run different workshops. So TDI specialise in helping social enterprises who have got something that's exciting and it's working, and they help it scale. They help it grow and take on investment and really magnify the impact of your social enterprise.
So the organisations that they're kind of working with tend to be, would it be correct to say, newer social enterprises from those early stages?
It's been a really wide range. So we've sort of changed our scope a bit as we've gone along. We thought it would be a lot of new social enterprises. What we've found recently is we are seen as being incredibly desirable by quite large not-for-profits who have been successful over the past, 20, 30, 40 years. And now they're going, social enterprise is the future. We don't really know how to adapt. And so they bring us in to kind of help them build a sustainable business model that's not so grant dependent.
And would that be having an offshoot social enterprise attached to their organisation or adapting some of, I guess, the strategies of social enterprise within their organisation?
It's often both. Often a lot of times people come in saying, can you please help me find a legal structure that can help us form a social enterprise? And my response to that is generally, yes, but. And it's that because I go, yes, we can do that, but that's not the real challenge. The real challenge is changing your mindset and going from a not-for-profit mindset to a social enterprise mindset is quite a significant change that a lot of people don't see coming. And it's about moving from a grant-dependent mindset and going, okay, I actually now need to start finding customers, which means I need to be really clear as to why people buy, how I bring them on, how we treat them, that sort of thing. And you're essentially asking them to think like a business. And that's not always very comfortable.
And so this social enterprise mindset, I'm interested in touching on that a little bit more. And I guess talking about on a theoretical level what you mean by social enterprise, because I guess it's something that can be a bit fluid and there's a lot of different types of organizations that might take on this label of social enterprise. Now, I read a blog post that you wrote, I think, for the Difference Incubator recently about the dangers of defining social enterprises based on what they do with their profits. And I was hoping you could discuss your thinking, I guess, behind this article, because I thought that was quite interesting.
This is not a very popular thing to say to a room full of social entrepreneurs, but I do think it is really important. Previously, people defined themselves as a social enterprise by where their profit distribution goes. So there's a sense that in order to qualify, you need to give away 50% of the profits that you make. And that's not a bad thing in itself, but I find that's often a distraction. A social enterprise for me is an organization that does good and makes money. So you have a clear, deliberate, defined social impact that you're striving towards, but also that you are making money and that you're financially viable and that you're actually a sustainable business. The reason that the 50% thing to me becomes a distraction is that I personally think success should be measured by how much you actually do. So it's very possible to be a very public, well-known social enterprise, say you're giving half your profits away, but then if you don't actually make any profit, I'd argue that you haven't really done very much good at all. So the question I use, the test I use is, what happens if you break even in a year? If you run a social enterprise for a year and you financially happen to break even, have you made the world a better place? Have you done good? And for me, my favorite social enterprises are the ones who have a resounding yes to that question.
I mean, is this a challenge for new organizations, new social enterprises where, I mean, it's fairly typical for a new small business to maybe not break even within the early kind of period. How would you kind of weigh up then the challenges for a new organization in maybe can they not call themselves a social enterprise? Perhaps if that's the situation early on, or...
I think you absolutely can. And it's because I think it's defined by what you can actually measure that you've done. So for an organization like Street, so Street are quite a well-known social enterprise. They run a series of cafes. They're a really, really good organization. Their profit distribution is one element of what makes them a social enterprise. But for me, the thing that's really remarkable is the employment opportunities they create for homeless young people. And so they did a promotion when they hit 1 million coffees sold, where they released some statistics about how many young people had gone through their program and how much employment they'd been able to create for them. But they also had this stat about how many free-range eggs they used. And they said that they'd used 123,000 free-ranged eggs in their cafe. And that number stuck with me for some reason. They described it as being 40 Eureka Towers worth if you laid them all end to end. And it's things like that where I go, you know what, you can actually do a lot of social good through your payroll, through who you employ, through if it's people with disabilities, if it's people who are, long-term unemployed or homeless or asylum seekers or all sorts of things like that, but also through the resources that you use. It may well be that, but if we can sell more and more products, if we can run this many services, this is the amount of waste we divert from landfill, or this is the amount that we can recycle, or this is the amount of awareness we can promote. And it's groups like that where I go, it's really hard to turn a profit and it's really hard to break even. But these organizations can really change the world, even if they're not giving away substantial amounts of money.
As I guess a whole of business approach.
Yeah, exactly right. It is so hard to run a small business. The stats about small business failure are horrifying. And that's even for groups who are driven on being profitable. And as a social entrepreneur, your attention is somewhat split between also creating as much social impact as you possibly can. So I feel like social enterprise is the future, and I do believe it is the best type of business structure, but I'm under no illusions that it's really, really hard, and making a profit is by no means guaranteed. I know a lot of people are really keen on SROI, social return on investment. For us, we use a really simple framework, which is inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. And it's really just looking at what is the intention of the organization. So what have you set out to do, and then finding the right impact metric that is appropriate.
Now, we touched on impact for social enterprises before. Driving impact and measuring impact is also interesting. But what I wanted to ask you about is, I guess, perhaps how do you demonstrate that impact to stakeholders, customers, and clients? And why is that important as a social enterprise?
I think the reason why it's really important is because one of the great strengths that social enterprises have is the stories that they're able to tell. When you find groups who have got a really remarkable story behind them, there's something really magnetic and really appealing about it. And especially when people haven't heard of what a social enterprise is, when you can start throwing around numbers like we employed this many people with a disability, or we've diverted 100 tons of waste away from landfill, or we've avoided using, or we've managed to, all those sort of things. I think they're really, really powerful. If you look at something like what Thank You do with their products, they have their track their impact features, so you can look up and see what they've done. And that's really crucial to telling the story of why those products and why those projects are so important. I think impact measurement is really hard. I don't have a single perfect system for doing it. I think as an industry, we haven't quite worked out what is the best way of measuring that. For me, the solution is to keep it really, really simple. So if you're in the business of employing young homeless people, or if you're in the business of replacing plastic or, disposable cups or something like that, just pick the thing that tells the story and then be hyper clear as to exactly how your organization is able to help solve that problem. Certainly from an investment point of view, an investor wants to be really clear as to how their support is actually going to lead to making the world a better place. So I think that's something where if you're going to be pitching, you don't just want to say, yes, we will help the environment. You want to be really clear about exactly how am I planning on doing this.
Now, at the recent Sprout Summit, you spoke on creating a sustainable business model for your social enterprise. And I was hoping you could outline a little of what you covered in this session for anyone who might not have had the chance to attend.
Sure. So business models is one of the most unfortunate pieces of jargon in our industry. So for me, the first priority was just clearing up what exactly we're talking about and why is it so important. So for me, the number one challenge that social enterprises have is staying alive. As I mentioned earlier, it's really hard to run even a for-profit business and stay around. So for me, my aim when I work with a social enterprise is how do I keep you alive? How do I keep you sustainable and financially viable for the next 2 years so that you can iron out the issues with your enterprise and you can experiment and you can try new things and you can fail at some and succeed at others and go from there. The way to do that is to make sure that your organization has what we call a sustainable business model. What I talked about at the summit was the idea that for me, this boils down to 3 words. And those 3 words are desirability, feasibility, and viability. I am absolutely convinced that a successful social enterprise has to tick those 3 boxes. You have to get good at those 3 things. So you need a business that is desirable. So you need to know who your customer is, what makes them buy, why they like you, how you get in front of them, those sort of questions. You also need to be very, very clear on what makes this business feasible. Is this all dependent on you? Are you about to start a social enterprise cafe when you're the only person who can make coffees? Or it's what machinery do we need? Or what partners do we need? Or what other external support do we need to make this work? And then the final piece of the puzzle is viability. And this is the one that people don't often like to talk about, but I think it needs to be addressed, is how do we design a model that can be financially self-sustaining? So by self-sustaining, I mean, how do we build a business that can pay its own way and not be dependent on constantly going out and finding grants?
Now, you've had a lot of experience working with many different social enterprises, and I was wondering if you could instill some of this experience into advice for new, up-and-coming, starting out social enterprises, I guess especially based on the kind of mistakes that you're seeing people make and how they go about solving them.
Yeah, sure thing. One of the biggest ones I see is a lot of new social enterprises come up with an idea for a product and a social issue that they're going to solve. And then I think they misjudge how the market is going to receive them. I think a lot of people go, I've got a lot of support. I have a lot of supporters who want to see this business succeed, and they mistake that for we have a lot of customers who would like to buy this product. So for me, the number one danger is don't expect support just because you're social. Expect support because you solve a problem for your customer. Expect support because your product is better than your regular commercial competitors. That's the thing that really helps keep people alive. I mean, I look at groups like social enterprise cafes like Kinfolk in Melbourne. The thing that impresses me most about Kinfolk is that they make incredibly good coffee. It is an absolute joy to go there because they have amazing staff, they have great food, they've got really good coffee, they're located in a very convenient location, and as it happens, they also give away 100% of their profits. And as it happens, they also employ a lot of volunteers and use a lot of organic and free-range things and do wonderful things for the world. But you're not asking customers to make any sort of sacrifice. As long as you're able to give customers something that is genuinely good quality and it does good at the same time, you give yourself the best chance of success. Another thing I would suggest is don't design a legal structure for yourself where you're dependent on making profit to have some sort of social impact. So I touched on this before, but make sure that you're able to do good even in the years that you break even. Breaking even for a new enterprise is an extraordinarily hard thing to do, and it's very, very impressive. So make sure that people can't knock or criticize the model just because you're not giving money directly away. I'd also suggest avoid grant dependency. The way to avoid grant dependency is to design for it from day one. Grants are really powerful for organizations who are starting up, but they become really, really tempting to lean on. So I've worked with several organizations who 10 months of the year, they run some of the most well-known, fantastic social enterprises that people listening to this will have heard of. And then they get to about April in the financial year, and they realize they're about $80,000 short of breaking even, and the panic sets in. And it's terrifying. And they have to pretty much drop everything. They have to stop focusing on the actual operations of the business, and they have to frantically start grant writing. And it's a really, really concerning, depressing experience to watch that pan out. If you can be financially sustainable, you buy yourself a lot of time and you give yourself a lot of freedom to make mistakes, to try new things, to experiment, to innovate. And ultimately, it also helps you sleep at night. Another thing I'd suggest is don't look for investment too early. If you want a good example as to what impact investors look for, I'd highly recommend watching shows like Shark Tank, either the Australian one or the American one, or Dragon's Den is the UK one. I think people think that impact investors are a different breed. Having met and worked with a lot of them for a long time, I can confirm that they're really not. A lot of the questions that a standard investor has are exactly the same concerns that an impact investor will have. And what an investor is looking for in an enterprise is they want to see validation that this works. They want to see that, yes, you sell a really good product or service, and yes, you have a really strong value proposition, and you have a large network of customers, and you've tried it and you've tested it, and you've got some sort of evidence base behind what you're doing. When you have that behind you, it's comparatively quite easy to get an investor to really revolutionize your business and help you scale and grow. But if you haven't got much proof of it, an investor's either going to not want to have a bar of it, or you're going to get unfavorable investment terms. One element that a lot of early founders overlook is the need to design something that you can step away from. As an entrepreneur, so much of the business falls back on you, and you find yourself responsible for doing pretty much everything. So when I joined TDI, we were a startup. I've been there since day zero. And that was me. It means I get to do a lot of the financial stuff, and I get to build all of our IKEA furniture, and I get to meet all of our clients and help run all our events. And you do a lot of everything. The danger is that the business becomes dependent on just one person, or just one or two key people or founders or technicians. What you need to make sure is that in the process of building the business, you make yourself redundant and you make yourself replaceable. And I don't say that just so that your board can get rid of you. You need to make yourself replaceable so that you can then go on and explore the new horizons, and you get to then, your mind can be focused on how do we expand. If you're running a business where you are the main salesperson, you really put a cap on how much you can grow. So the aim is to build a business model that isn't dependent on just you, the founder and the entrepreneur. Another issue that's not a very popular one to talk about is financial metrics. I work with a lot of not-for-profits. I work with a lot of new social enterprises, and they're really excited to talk about the social impact that they have. They're really excited to talk about their crowdfunding campaign. And when you ask them, how do you acquire new customers, or what's your process for retaining your existing users, they are conspicuously quiet. A lot of people, they find the financial metrics really, really hard to engage with. And therefore the temptation is to ignore them and just hope that everything will be fine. So for me, one of the real indicators of success early on is, do your founders and do your core team understand the most important numbers that are going to determine your success? So it's things like, do you know what your break-even point is? Do you know how much your average customer spends? Do you know what your margin of safety is? These are all questions that sound really dry and technical, but when it comes down to it, these are the questions that are keeping a lot of entrepreneurs awake at night. It's, how do I know if I'm going to be able to make payroll in 2 weeks' time? Or it's, are we targeting the right customers? Or what happens if people leave? Or, those sort of questions are really, really daunting. But I highly recommend learning your core numbers early on, because it allows you to make really good strategic decisions. One of the things that I've seen work really, really well is enterprises who are focused on building a really aesthetically pleasing product or service tend to grow and spread much faster than you'd think. So when you look at groups like Thank You and you look at Keep Cup and you look at Who Gives a Crap, one of the things they do really well is they make a really nice looking product. Too often what we say as internally as an industry is we go, people will like us because of the detailed impact that we have. And what I've seen play out firsthand is that customers like things that solve a problem for them right now. And people like things that please them right now. So at TDI, we big buyers of Who Gives a Crap toilet paper, which is a fantastic social enterprise. And I think the thing they do really well is, I'm not sure if your listeners will have seen this, but their toilet paper comes in these really, really nice paper wrappers. And it's all very colorful and it's, quite simple designs, but it's really quite eye-catching. So in our bathroom, we've got quite a prominent shelf with all the different rolls of toilet paper displayed. And it has struck me that there's really no other brand that we would buy where we would display our toilet paper as the first thing you see when you walk in. Or if you look at someone like Thank You, I think the clever thing that they've done is they made a really good looking water bottle. They've made really good looking muesli bars, and they've priced them in a way that's really easy for customers to justify buying them. And I think that really helps spread the social enterprise story, but I also think it helps you get sales. When you don't ask people to pay a premium or make a sacrifice to support you, you give yourself a much better chance of success. I think Keep Cup is something similar. I initially resisted the whole Keep Cup thing because I didn't particularly like the plasticky ones. When they came up with I don't know if people have seen this, when they came out with those glass ones, I went, whoa, that's a really nice looking cup. And suddenly it became much easier to justify. Now, if Keep Cup came out with a statistic that said, we've recently tripled our social impact, and the cup was ugly, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't think it would have changed my decision-making one bit. But they come out with something that looks twice as good or is twice as practical, and suddenly it becomes really easy for customers to justify to themselves helping get on board.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of those tips, Isaac. I think that new social enterprises are going to find that advice really valuable. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to finally touch on an idea that is key to what we like to talk about at Sprout, which is how to move an idea from the theoretical space. And this idea might be to do with a whole organization, a single project or enterprise, or just a new strategy. But how do you go about getting that idea out into the real world, into something practical? Did you have perhaps one key tip that you might be able to share with people about, tackling this process?
Sure thing. The key to success is iteration. Your first idea is probably not that good. The 10th version of your idea is probably the one that's going to be successful. So for what I've seen, the aim is to get to version number 9 or get to version number 10 as quickly and as cheaply as possible. The way to do that is to keep talking with people, talk to investors, talk to the different intermediaries and incubators and accelerators, but also use things like crowdfunding to say, if I build this, will people jump on board? If I build this, will people actually pay money for it? That's the best way of finding out really quickly whether or not your idea has legs. I've always said that people vote with their wallet and they vote with their feet. It's quite easy as a starting founder to find people who will tell you that you're doing really good work. What you want to get much faster than that, though, is find people who tell you, yes, I will buy this at this particular price point. And tools like crowdfunding have been invaluable for people to be able to capitalize on that and go, okay, I've got 100 people who have told me that they're willing to put in $50 each. This is a really clean way of passing the hat around and getting that support for it.
I like to close off by asking our guests if there's an organization doing something amazing in this space or in another area that they want to give a shout out to, I guess, or that they think that our listeners might be interested to know about. Is there someone you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, okay. So I work with a lot of different organizations, and one of the ones that's impressed me a lot recently is called Mr. GP. Mr. GP is around how do we get Aussie blokes to actually front up to the doctor. And that's not your typical premise for a social enterprise. And I really, really love it. I go, yeah, this is a fantastic way of saying, how do we design a GP? How do we design an environment that people can walk into where they will actually go? How do you remove the barriers that stop people from getting medical help or getting attention or talking with mental health professionals or getting support or counselling or checkups and different things like that? Mr. GP, it's a really clever way of designing an environment that probably looks more like a bar rather than a waiting room. You're probably more likely to have a beer with your doctor rather than to, sit there awkwardly under the fluorescent lights. It's a way of saying what will make people go. It started from that idea, and I think that's a really powerful one. So it's still early days, and with my luck, by the time that this podcast comes out, they will have changed their model somewhat, and that's a good thing. But I'd highly recommend having a look at Mr. GP, both if you're a gent who knows they need to go to the doctor more but can't bring themselves to, or if you are the partner of a gent who needs to go to the doctor and you've been nagging them and they just won't listen and they won't do it. I think they're going to do some really powerful stuff very soon.
Awesome. Well, that sounds really interesting and definitely something worth looking out for. Just before we finish up, how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to find out more about what you do or ask any questions about what we've spoken about today?
Yeah, sure thing. So I write a blog at isaacjeffries.com. You can also get in touch with me through the Difference Incubator or through Business for Development, or add me on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today, Isaac. I think you've really given people some things to think about, some things to get started on, and some things that will really help them to work on a social enterprise or a business that does good, with a great opportunity for success and for driving impact. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.